I'm the Reverend William Levwood. My pronouns are he and him. So as we begin our service, I invite you, if you're at home, to close your other windows, your other apps. If you're here, to silence your phone, and then to take a deep breath and center yourself for worship. We begin by calling forth and honoring the people who made each of us, our biological and spiritual ancestors, teachers, and guides. We call forth those who imagined and made our congregation possible, sustaining it up to this present day. We open and welcome to the ancestral people of this land, acknowledging that our church, like all of Burke, rests on the unceded territory of the Manahoac tribe of the Great Sioux Nation. We seek healing and the realization of justice with the people of this land who live on and their descendants, the present-day members of the Monacan Indian Nation, the Patawomic Indian Tribe of Virginia, and the Piscataway Indian Nation. We honor the ancestors as we move toward healing, so that all together may one day know true justice.
We welcome you to Accotink Unitarian Universalist Church live stream worship service. I am Sheila Doles, and my pronouns are she, her, hers. Accotink UU Church is a welcoming and inclusive community that seeks to create a more just and compassionate world. All are welcome here in this justice-seeking, earth-healing community of faith. You are welcome no matter whom you love, no matter your identity or heritage, no matter your beliefs or background, no matter your means or abilities. You are welcome here in this religious community. If you're new to Accotink and would like to talk more about this church, please be sure to reach out to me, our minister, Rev. William Levwood, or one of today's greeters using the chat box. On our website, www.accotinkuu.org, you can check the online order of service on the worship section. While you're on the website, be sure to check our events page for upcoming virtual gatherings and other news. Whether you're a longtime member or a newcomer or something in between, we encourage you to stay for our virtual coffee hour immediately after this service, or our in-person coffee hour. We're so delighted that you decided to join us today. Welcome. Because You Said This, by our very own Reverend William Levwood. Because you said this, I said that. Because you said that, I didn't speak for a very long time. The only breathing we did together, until the sigh and the next words of the story tumbling out like an avalanche of stones that had been lodged behind my throat since before I learned to speak. Because you said this, I said that, and then this, and you that, and he what, and she where, until we were all telling a new story, singing a new song, even a new kind of music never heard before. Because you said this, I said that, which began a journey, peeking around corners, dancing through thickets, jogging up mountains, walking backwards down those same mountains until we arrived somewhere we'd never been before or since. Because of the way you sat there, a memory arose within each of us, and the circle quivered and pulsed with our hurt, which we shared with each other and received from each other, held tenderly, until the dam broke open and the laughter poured out, and the laughter just wouldn't stop, like the joy of the world once released would never end. Because you said this, I said that. Perhaps this is how the world was created, and how the world keeps being created, moment by moment, day by day, year by year. From the depths within, the colored light emerges from out of our mouths, like the mouths of the first single-celled organism that called out in longing for a playmate to come out and play. From then to now to forever, the colored light emerges from out of our mouths, our limbs, our faces, our spines, and all of that light dances together. Together dances a new dance, because you said this and I said that.
Unitarian Universalism draws from 6 sources: direct experience, the words and deeds of prophetic people, wisdom from the world's religions, from Jewish and Christian teachings, humanist teachings, and the teachings of earth-centered traditions. That's our 6 sources in brief. Each of them has a longer description that fills out not only what the source is, but what springs forth from that source. Our first source, for example, is the direct experience of that transcending mystery and wonder affirmed in all cultures, which moves us to a renewal of spirit and an openness to the forces which create and uphold life. That source comes from our transcendentalist heritage, and it's brimming with theological vitality. A transcendent mystery that moves us with a renewal of spirit, an opening to forces in the universe that create and sustain life, an abundant earth alive with energies flowing through it. Our second source is the words and deeds of prophetic people. But it continues, the words and deeds of prophetic people which challenge us to confront powers and structures of evil with justice, compassion, and the transforming power of love. That second source, with its call, its challenge to confront the powers and structures of evil, is the precursor to our 8th principle. Now, I'm not going to go through each of the 6 sources, but I invite you at some point to take a look at the longer versions of them, because there is so much richness there. I do feel that there's something missing, though, that to some degree, each of these sources can be interpreted to be external to us, to be something we study and learn from, not a wisdom that we possess within us. Even that first source, which affirms our direct experience, it speaks of our direct experience of a transcending mystery. And I imagine that mystery outside of us. And I also think that we mostly understand that first source, that direct experience, to be an individual experience, not the collective one. So I wonder, what if there is another source? A source that honors the wisdom that is revealed within from our own experience of living together. A source that acknowledges our experience of living as a communal experience. That community itself is the source of wisdom, insight, compassion, and love. So I propose a 7th source for our Unitarian Universalism. Let me go back a little ways. Many years ago, I noticed that when I was involved in a particularly engaging conversation, a conversation that really felt in the groove, where you're finishing each other's sentences or at least building on each other's ideas, I realized I was having thoughts in that conversation that arose from the conversation itself. Thoughts I had never had before. thoughts I never would have had were it not for the conversation. That at some point an idea or a series of ideas had been introduced in the conversation that led to this new idea that I now found coming out of my mouth. But I couldn't really take credit for this new insight. I couldn't take credit for it even if it had come out of my mouth, because I knew it never would have come out of my mouth were it not for what had come out of the other person's mouth moments before. Perhaps wouldn't have come out of my mouth, in fact, were it not for the last dozen statements to come out of both of our mouths. That the insight didn't come from either of the speakers, it came from the interactive flow of the conversation itself. I noticed this first in duet conversations, one-on-one conversations. But when I became a minister, I noticed that it often happens in group conversations as well, particularly in what we call small group ministry. I noticed it happening in the UU Explorations classes, the new member classes at the Unitarian Universalist Church in Tallahassee. I noticed it happening often in the Soul Matters Starting Points classes here at Accotink, our newcomer classes. I believe this to be an essential source of the evolving wisdom and the renewal of our living tradition. As vital as the words or deeds of a prophetic social justice leader, as full of wisdom for our ethical life as any Buddhist scripture or Vedic philosophical treatise or any verse from the Quran, as brimming with compassion, loving kindness, and tender care as any parable of Jesus or mitzvot from the Torah, as likely to be the birthing of a new direction in scientific inquiry as anything published in a peer-reviewed journal, as attuned to the cycles and seasons of the turning world, as likely to be a turning point in our relating harmoniously and sustainably with Earth as any long-standing Earth-centered tradition, and as direct an experience of the transcending mystery and as life-giving as anything I might discover while meditating alone on retreat in a monastery. This month's Soul Matters theme is renewing faith. And my faith is renewed by this seventh source, by the knowledge that there is a wisdom that arises between people through the act of conversation. Knowing that, I have hope that we'll be able to make it through the many crises of our time. Because this seventh source tells me that we have the wisdom we need, that it's right here in this community, and all we need to do is activate it. So let's talk about how we do that. Science writer Annie Murphy Paul explores what I'm calling the seventh source in her book, The Extended Mind, The Power of Thinking Outside the Brain. She tells the story of Carl Wyman, a Nobel Prize winner and professor of physics at Stanford University, and his struggle to teach physics to undergraduates. Year after year, he could tell that his students just weren't getting it. That he would, quote, lay it out for them, describing, explaining, even demonstrating the core concepts of physics, but they just weren't getting it. And this wasn't unique to Carl Wyman. Murphy Paul points out that decades of research have found that high school and college students who are taught physics in the conventional manner, via lectures and textbooks, typically don't learn the subject in any depth. It turns out that a crucial key to learning is found in the social engagement of students and peers. This social engagement, the hours spent advising, debating with, and recounting anecdotes with one another, is an essential part of the learning process. So Wyman changed how he taught physics to undergraduates. Instead of the students sitting quietly, listening intently as he lectured about physics, Wyman had them huddled together in clusters, debating the solution to a challenging physics problem he, as their professor, had posed. By having the students engage in what he called multiple brief small group discussions in which they tried to solve a challenging hypothesis, discussing and debating their reasoning with each other, they were learning how to think like expert physicists. This active learning through social engagement is how we, as Unitarian Universalists, nurture ourselves through our own journey of spiritual development. Through what we call in our fourth principle, our responsible search for truth and meaning. A search that we embark on and travel together. Some faith traditions give you the answers. Maybe you're asked to accept these answers on faith. Maybe the reasoned arguments of master thinkers of the past are placed before you with the expectation that you'll see the unerring wisdom of their logic and its conclusions. In some, you're led on a mostly solitary journey through contemplative practices like meditation. Again, with the expectation that these solitary contemplative practices will lead you to the same conclusions the enlightened one came to thousands of years ago. I'm not knocking these methodologies. Many a religious seeker has found a workable and life-affirming faith through these methods. But this isn't how we function as Unitarian Universalists. It's true, there might be things that you take as self-evident, and I do hope that you spend some of your time studying the great thinkers of the past. And I hope for you that you find some time for contemplation, whether that's in meditation or walking outside through a wooded area, or sitting with a cup of coffee, or music making, or engaging in weaving. But in Unitarian Universalism, we trust human beings to engage in their own search for truth and meaning, in conversation with other human beings who are engaged in their search for truth and meaning. Not the thinking of exceptional human beings. We trust that each person, each ordinary human being, has valuable insights to bring to the journey. And that it's by sharing these insights with each other, testing out our hypotheses, sharing the experiential results of our own experiments in living, opening our hearts and minds to each other, by engaging that seventh source, engaging in deep dialogue with each other, that we come to know ourselves, each other, and the deepest truths of how to live a human life of authenticity, integrity, wisdom, compassion, and care. Now, in Annie Murphy Paul's book, she gives all the academic names for this emerging science of thinking outside the brain. She writes about the interactive brain hypothesis, the premise that when we interact socially, our brains engage different neural cognitive processes than when we're thinking on our own or acting on our own. She writes about socially distributive cognition. That just means the way people think with the minds of others. Collaboratively improvising systems of communal engagement in which a group can think together, can effectively become one mind in action. That happens in innumerable contexts in our world, but I think the easiest illustration of socially distributed cognition is an improvising jazz band, like the one featured in Amanda Gordon's children's book, Change Sings. Gorman uses the refrain, change sings, to personify this process of thinking together, so that the music is created in the moment. The new music of the future is created in the moment through a collective visioning of a future that doesn't exist yet, with new insights emerging from that creative interchange that we engage in while moving towards a common goal. That seventh source. Annie Murphy Paul also explains how important stories are, how they capture. Our brains are designed for stories. Stories capture our attention because our brains, quote, have evolved to seek out the evidence of causal relationships, and stories are all about causal relationships. Event A leads to event B, which in turn causes event C, and so on. And she shares that another way stories inform us, knitting our minds together, is how when we listen to a story, our brains experience the action as if it were happening to us. That by hearing a story, we engage in a dress rehearsal of what happened in the story. Our brains actually turn on as if the story was happening to us, as if we were running or dancing or crying. And that makes us better prepared when that event or a similar one happens to us in the future, or better able to process an event that has happened to us in the past. Murphy Paul also shares Hugo Mercier and Dan Sperber's argumentative theory of reasoning, which just shows that we think best when we're arguing together, with the aim of arriving jointly at something closer to the truth. David Johnson, a psychologist at the University of Minnesota, calls this constructive controversy. He defines it as the open-minded exploration of diverging ideas and beliefs. And according to Mercier, the key to arguing together is to approach the act of arguing with the aim of not winning at all cost, but of reaching the truth through a vigorous process of advancing claims and evaluating counterclaims. We use argument to its full advantage when we make the best case for our own position while granting the points lodged against it. When we energetically critique our partner's position while remaining open to its potential virtues. I love what Robert Sutton, the Stanford Business School professor, has to say about this. He says that we should endeavor to offer strong opinions weakly held. To have strong opinions weakly held. Or he puts it another way as well. He says, people should fight as if they are right and listen as if they are wrong. Now, this seventh source of Unitarian Universalism, this thinking outside of our brain, is alive in many moments and many contexts. But small group ministry, like the Soul Matters small groups, are designed to engage this seventh source. In these Soul Matters groups, like the one starting on March 29th, sign up now. In these small Soul Matter groups, participants engage in this kind of deep interactive dialogue, sharing stories from their lives with each other, hearing how that story resonates with another person's life, making meaning together. They aren't exactly groups for arguing together, but they do engage in that same process, listening to another person's worldview and how they make sense of the world. You're able to test it against your own experiences. You're able to try on their way of journeying through life and celebrate a shared confluence or learn more about yourself through the contrast between your story and theirs. I have to admit, preaching a sermon like this, you realize pretty early on that you're like that professor standing up there with people just listening while you're telling them they should be engaging. So you can do that interactive engagement that I'm talking about in the Soul Matters small groups. If we weren't online and in person, I might have tried to have us do it here in person, but it seemed like a little too much. I want to give one more illustrative example of this. I think that this seventh source, this thinking outside our brain, is well illustrated by a drawing game that my 8-year-old played this week with an adult member of the First Unitarian Universalist Church in Richmond. In the game, the first player makes a mark, a line of some sort on the page, and then the second player adds to it, completing the drawing by adding more lines. And then you trade roles. So for example, my 8-year-old Haya drew a spiral. And her adult friend Sheila added another spiral to make 2 eyes, and then also added a nose, a mouth, and ears to make a face. And then Sheila drew an angular S. An angular S, or it might have been on its side. And Haya added more lines and turned it into a house with a roof and windows and a door. So I think this is a good illustration, no pun intended, of the seventh source in action. From the collaborative engagement of 2 or more people, a new thing arises. Something that would have never existed before, arising from the social interaction, from the cooperative exploration. The bass player lays out a rhythm, the drummer comes in and adds layers, the pianist enters bringing in new sound colors, maybe a contrasting rhythm. Then the horn players join, trumpet and sax bouncing off one another. And in the words of Amanda Gorman, the collective chant rises and sings. The communal movement roars and springs. There's a wave where change sings. There's hope where change sings. There's love where change sings. For we are the change we sing. We are what the world is becoming. We are the wave starting to spring. So may it be so, and may we be among those who make it so. Amen, 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 and blessed be.
Though we will extinguish our chalice flame, we carry within us what we kindled, the light of inspiration, warmth of compassion, the fire of commitment. May we bring these gifts into our lives and share them radiantly out into the world. I invite you now to join me in our community blessing with these words of David Bumba. This church is dedicated to the proposition that behind all our differences and beneath all our diversity, there is a unity that makes us one and binds us forever together in spite of time, death, and the space between the stars. We pause now in silent witness to that unity.
Community makes us, forms us, grows us. It's through the creative interaction that we have with each other, the conversation that's going on all the time, not just with our words, but with our eyes, our faces, our bodies. May we make that conversation a journey that we invite each of us onto, a journey that we support each other along, and one in which a new collective vision is made real by all of us. May it be so, and may we be among those who make it so.